This is Paul. Chad keeps wondering about other flotillas. I never know if there's actually any other sort of thing like a flotilla, like sort of has been happening around us. But there are a few other channels out there that I kind of keep an eye on. I don't necessarily watch a lot of their videos, but I watch some of them. And this is one of them. This channel got recommended to me. I don't even remember who mentioned it to me, but it's in some ways kind of in the same orbit. I noticed that Jared from Heliocentric was in for a conversation with him. And again, it's he seems to be probably has a similar audience to what we have. Some of you probably watch this channel, so but he recently made a video that I thought was really interesting and I wanted to talk about it. The video was the iceberg of traditional Christianity, and it was very interesting. It was a very interesting video. So let's just go.
The internet is a strange place, and the corner of the internet that I inhabit with these videos is
And of course, when he said corner of the internet, it was like, well, of course, that's not a phrase that's unique to our little group. But of course, that grabbed my salience, landscaper.
particularly peculiar. In my videos, I often come across people who are very interested in traditional Christianity, and that's great. And I am interested in it as well, and I've learned a lot from it. And I make these videos because I find it interesting. You probably watch them because you find them interesting, and I'm glad. But I think it's maybe time for us to address the fact that this corner of the internet can lead people down really strange rabbit holes that we
Now, again, I think more his corner of the internet perhaps than mine. I don't really know to what degree he's cultivated a corner of the internet. I don't really. Lance, this morning, Luke had a big live stream going this morning. And I think part of what makes whatever it is we're doing together online what it is again, it's less propositional and it's much more procedural. We are sort of participating. We're doing this. It's much more about practice than necessarily all the different beliefs that are being promoted or propagated.
should probably be talking about. Now, normally in my videos, they take the form more of a video essay in which it's scripted and a bit more philosophical. But today, I'm going to try to speak about the internet in the internet's language, and that is primarily that of memes. So, today I want to talk about the iceberg of traditional Christianity. This is just I didn't make the format, but the layers of this is something I set up and I think will be familiar to a lot of you. So for a lot of people, the journey of looking into traditional Christianity, and by this I mean forms of Christianity that have long histories and go back for quite some time, that have been around and have formed traditions. So this often starts, I'm going to take a Protestant perspective on this, with maybe reading Calvin and Luther. That's where it started for me during my theology degree. You begin going into the Reformation sources and say, wow, this has a lot more depth than my kind of evangelical upbringing. This is cool. But then that leads you to the next thing. You go, wait, Christianity started before the Reformation. What do we do with this? Then you find these people called the Church Fathers. Now, this is a big step. Maybe you start with someone like Athanasius and his book On the Incarnation, because, I mean, after all, it's recommended by C.S. Lewis, and he's pretty much the Protestant Pope, so that's a safe place to start. But then you realize, wait, the popular patristic series, there's so many of them, let me read them all. You don't read them all, but you read a couple of them and you decide the Church Fathers are pretty cool. That leads you then below the surface. And so you've read some of the Protestant sources, you've gotten into the Church Fathers, you realize the church has been around for a long time, but that leads you to realize that the church is a bit different than your own. And unfortunately, this takes the term when everyone begins to say, everything I ever grew up with was wrong. Now, not everyone does this, of course, but one of the things that often happens is that as people begin to...
And what's helpful about that moment is, you know, if you studied psychology, if you had an introduction to psychology course in high school, you would talk about basically differentiation, that teenagers differentiate from adults. First, they sort of take on the map of, first time they take the mapping of their parents and of their peers as sort of a first draft, and then they differentiate from their parents. And of course, some people just temperamentally, they sort of stay with the mapping that they receive. They like a mapping, there it is. They don't want to change their mapping. Other people, they always want new mappings. They love novelty, and so people go different fourths. So then non-denom is cringe. I really like his iceberg. I thought it was really clever. I really like this video a lot. When we get to the end, then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Be exposed to beauty outside of their tradition or outside of the sources that the church they grew up in pulled from, they begin to see that everything in their tradition is wrong. And now, this often happens, right? And it happens on a small scale when we grow up and we have that phase where we say that our parents were wrong about everything. This happened with my dad and I in politics. Everything he thought had to be wrong because, well, he had to be wrong because now I was turning into an adult and I had to define myself as not him, right? And then maybe you come around. Maybe you've had a similar experience. I think it often happens with church as well. It was a running joke in Bible college that the most dangerous thing is like a second semester Bible college student because he thinks he knows everything and then they go home over Christmas break and they inform their pastor that they're wrong about everything. Something similar happens when we investigate church history. We begin to say that, the church we grew up in is just cringe. Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but that's how we begin to feel. So this stage, especially if you come from like a lower church background, people begin to think, ugh, this is bad. And so you look for something else. And this generally comes in the form of liturgy. Now, what happened for me and maybe what happened for you is you go to something like a Latin mass. You go, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is so different. It's in a different language.
So, I've never been to the Divine Liturgy. I know I got the beard, but I've never been to an Orthodox church for a service. So not only am I going to the west coast of Ireland to a monastery to stay with the friars. I really got to nail all exactly what all these people are. And not only will we be meeting in a Roman Catholic church, but Paul Kingsnorth has invited me Sunday morning to attend the Divine Liturgy with him on Sunday morning. So it's like, maybe I'll pop. Maybe I'll be there like Father Josiah Treneman's. Maybe that will happen. And then the prayers of some of you will be answered and you'll be like, I knew it. Vanderclay just needed to get in the room and then it's going to happen. And then I'll trade my silly blue shirts for a lovely black thing. And behind me, it'll be filled with icons and don't bet on it. Just saying, I think I know myself a little bit, but let's continue.
Wooden so deep. Oh my goodness. This is awesome. But then you go further down the rabbit hole and you find the Divine Liturgy of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And you say, like those emissaries sent from Russia, I don't know if I'm in heaven or on earth, that this is the best thing you've ever experienced. And I'm using a bit, facetious language here, but those things really are beautiful. And you begin to say, whoa, this is different. This is so different. I need something like this. And maybe you go on a different ramp here and you go towards a Protestant liturgy, which I do think is worth saying. Like, a lot of the mainline churches have really beautiful liturgies that we just write off because we've been taught that the mainlines are bad, which might not be entirely accurate. But in any case, this often then comes to a real crux. We're getting far down the iceberg at this point. And that is the East-West decision. And what this means is we've got two groups at this point claiming to be the one true church. You've got the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholics. And historically, they have claimed that they are the one true church. And they've coupled this with the saying, albeit diversely understood, that outside the church there is no salvation, and so you've got to decide. And they both have really good arguments, and people get stuck here for a lot of time, and it can be really difficult, right? But what often happens is that once someone makes this decision, they become really, once again, defining themselves by what they're not. So just like you went from church fathers are cool, so my non-denom is cringe, you go from East is right, so West is heretic, or West is right, so East is heretic. And you have all of these volumes to pull on, right? About how the other side's wrong and how something like the Filioque leads to abortion, or that,
He's saying this and I'm just thinking, oh, wow, he's so right. I've seen this so often.
The East is really just like not even right. And so You get the point, right? It gets deep and weird at times here when you begin to say that everyone else is a heretic. And that leads you to a fun next level where not just like the other half of Christendom is heretical, but actually like 99% of people, including our hierarchs, are heretics. You see this once you get to like sedevacantists in the West, or you have just some really stringent and rigorous people in the East who look at people like the Ecumenical Patriarch or even just most of the metropolitans and say, yeah, they're all heretics. They've all got it wrong because I've read everything and I know, and my prophet on YouTube tells me that they're all wrong. And so, wow, we are deep down the rabbit hole now. We went from Luther and the church fathers being cool to everyone, including the leaders of the organizations we're in, being heretics. But hey, I mean, we're just watching the videos and reading the books, and we're just...
Tim Keller had this great line. I don't remember it verbatim, but I remember it in a sermon where, he basically says, and then I look at my wife and I think, well, maybe you're okay. Maybe. It's just sort of the... It's sort of the self-centered. It's almost a Luciferian theological. Now he's going to talk about purity spirals. It's a Luciferian purity spiral, and down they go,
coming to the logical conclusions. And then we get to really weird places. And these are the levels that concern me the most as I look out at what's happening in these spheres. It's what I like to think of as a kind of purity spiraling. And Trent Horn has...
Now, and this is... Well, we can finish this Trent Horn's comment.
Talked well about this. And it's this idea of we want to be ever more pure. We want to be ever more different.
Okay, and this is where things got interesting for me, because I was thinking back on my conversation with Vervaeke and Pageau and what Jonathan talked about in terms of the, let's say, the sacred foundations of the 20th century West. And I am not a Holocaust denier at all. I do believe women should vote. In fact, I am pro women in Protestant ministry. I am pro democratic governments. I am pro freedom of religion. So in that way, I am same team as him. But I thought what was interesting was that for him, these were the demarcations of craziness. There's a great, so in the latest gospel seminar video, I haven't gotten through it yet, Peterson opens up with the moment when Jesus' family tries to take charge of him because they think he's insane. And Vervaeke sort of weighs in nicely at that moment, recognizing that we're really dealing with some basic orientations here. And Jesus was so disruptive, he looked crazy. And again, I thought what was so interesting about this moment in this video was that these were sort of the foundations of our latest current secular moment. Now, I'm not a Holocaust denier, but you don't have to be a Holocaust denier to recognize how, as Pageau said, Hiroshima and the Holocaust become these sacred foundations for our culture. And what's going to be interesting is that 100 years or 200 years from now, those will likely not be the sacred foundations anymore. What will be? That's a little scary. For some people who, let's say, were born in the last 20 years or so, COVID and the COVID experience of lockdowns may become a sacred foundation. Who knows what? I'm sure for people in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine will become a sacred foundation. Because it's interesting, because if you go cross-culturally, I remember when I was speaking to someone who is now in the conservative Reformed churches, Presbyterian, he grew up Armenian. not Armenian in terms of theology, but Armenia in terms of the country, Armenian in Egypt. And so part of what he was working through was the fact that the Armenian genocide for their culture was a sacred foundation. And part of his conversations with me on the channel have been trying to move away from the Armenian genocide as a sacred foundation. Now, he's not a genocide denier or a genocide skeptic at all, but he noted that these certain things become foundations culturally, civilizationally. And then the interesting question becomes, okay, how does religion work? Where are those foundations? And this for me has long been a point of I part of what has always struck me was that ostensibly, whether they were confessional points, creedal points, or maybe the practice of your particular denomination, like in the Christian Reformed Church for a long time, Sabbatarianism was a big deal. The practice of sending your children to Christian school was a very big deal. You could not be a minister in certain Christian Reformed churches if you didn't send your kids to Christian school because you were letting down the side. And of course, lately, issues like access to abortion or promotion of same-sex marriage or transgenderism become these shibboleths out there in the world. And so I always noticed that. And for me, it made this entire conversation more interesting. Now, he's basically going to say, these people are beyond the pale. But again, why these topics? Where are the boundaries? How do they work? And again, in terms of this little corner of the internet and the wide range of conversations and conversation partners, from our Jewish friends, from Unitarian Sam, from I don't know. I think it's just meta Luke. I think Luke is just so meta. He's just, I don't have any way to describe him except Luke or meta Luke. So, but it was just interesting that he's tracking all the way down here, watching this, and then the bridge too far is just these sacred touchstones of our broader culture, not just embraced by confessional Christians or people who identify as Christians, but these. And so this sort of gets into my series on the implicit religion. These are our implicit religions.
I think first of all, I totally agree with you, Paul. I think that if we look at the sacred events, let's say, or the sacred moments and sacred spaces that have created our time now, I think of Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and I think of the Holocaust. Like, those are things that I think of in the sense that they are massive human sacrifices that have founded the modern, like, let's say, post-World War II state. And the entire world order is based on those events. All our narrative, everything we say, is all based on those events. We still, even today, like even Trump being elected is deeply ingrained in these sacred, let's say, stories. And so I completely agree. And that's why I present it as a kind of gray thing, like that the idea that the sacred is returning. It's both, it's like George Floyd was a little eruption of the sacred. It's like, here's a fast where everybody is locked into their house, a human sacrifice, and then an ecstatic explosion. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, not sure we want that. But the thing is that in some ways, one of the things that is happening is that we're also exhausting the story. It's let's say, and it happens just naturally through time with people dying and generations moving away. And And, some aspects of the story that were also taboo are people are trying to talk about it in different ways. And so this is demythologization of the stories is also going to happen of that sacred origin. And so we can see attempts at that now. We can kind of see it happening. We can see this poke. And so it's calling for another foundation. Um, and so I agree that there's an aspect of it that is absolutely terrifying. But the problem is that it's going to these things are going to happen. Like there's no like for example, like this weird desire for World War III, like this weird like longing and dreaming of nuclear war at this moment, with a mix of fascination and terror that we can see in the eyes of people that keep talking about it. It's like that's a longing for the sacred too, it's a longing for something that will just set things right. Like it will make everything clear again, because now everything is muddy and nobody knows where they are and nobody knows what to think and nobody knows. It's like a good war, let's just put everything in place. And so these are all things that are happening, and they're all things that are very frightening. And that's why I keep harping on the fact that I think the way that Jordan presents it, is deeply a Christian way of thinking of it. It's like the cross replaced this with self-sacrifice. It is the sacred, like it is both the ultimate sacred and the disarming of the sacred, right? In the way that René Girard talks about it, but then also, I think in a way that Girard misses, because it is still anyways, there's something else going on in Jesus's cross that is not just a disarming of the sacred; it's a refounding of it in a way, in a deep way. So I think that it's weird, like the only solution to avoiding a sacred event in the big sense is to enact it personally, in a small way, almost like a kind of diffusion mechanism, like where we enact the best aspects of the sacred in our lives and our families and our communities, and that can prevent the need for a new sacred foundation, which will be bloody. Like there's almost no other way for it to happen. Like, so I mean, you could imagine something. I mean, it could be something else. Maybe that's why Elon Musk wants to go to Mars, because he's looking for a sacred event. He's looking for something to refound us, something to give us a new direction, a new purpose. Maybe that's all these things are kind of bubbling up at the same time. But I agree with Paul that we cannot forget the what the sacred is and how it manifests itself.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. We're in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show. Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes or atheistic Jobs to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes and Jewish Jacobs and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.